The road to Harker Hollow was never marked on maps. It began as a split in the gravel near Boone's Ridge, a narrow track that sank between black pine and shale. Travelers said the road felt wrong beneath their tires, like driving over something that wasn't meant to be disturbed, and at its end, where the mist clung low and the air turned metallic, the Harker house waited, a rotting, three-story structure that leaned against the hillside as if it were tired of standing. For decades, no one had lived there, or so folks claimed. But every autumn, when the leaves bled red across the mountains, lights flickered in its windows, a single lantern glow in the attic, a shadow crossing behind the curtain, and sometimes the sound of singing drifting down the hollow. Not words, just low, mournful tones that made the dogs in nearby towns howl until dawn. When social worker Evelyn Shaw arrived in Waycross County, she'd already heard the stories. She thought they were folklore meant to warn off outsiders. But a week into her assignment, a case file landed on her desk. Harker, Benjamin, age 72, property inspection pending after. Multiple reports of unnatural noises and odors consistent with decomposition. The sheriff's office had refused to go back after their last visit in '92. Evelyn didn't believe in curses, only in neglect and hidden trauma. She packed her kit and set out for the hollow. The road grew narrower with every mile. Fog crawled up from the valley floor, muffling sound. The forest felt close, as if it were leaning in to listen. When her GPS froze, she killed the engine and stepped out. The silence was thick, almost physical. Even the insects were still. Ahead, the Harker house emerged from the fog gray, skeletal, its porch sagging under decades of rot. Vines clung to its siding like veins. She felt that instinctive pull in her gut, part fear, part fascination. The air smelled of wet stone and old copper. She climbed the porch steps, each one groaning underfoot, and knocked. No answer. The door drifted open an inch. UNLATCHED. Inside, dust hung like mist. Furniture sat where it had been abandoned, covered with sheets that moved slightly, though no breeze reached in. A clock ticked faintly somewhere deeper in the house, out of rhythm. Evelyn called out, "Mr. Harker." Her voice came back a half-second later, distorted, not echoing, but imitating. The parlor walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, each showing the same family, generation after generation, faces growing paler, eyes duller. In the later ones, something was wrong with the light, as if the camera had captured more than faces, faint shapes in the corners, human-sized shadows where no one stood. The floor creaked behind her. She turned, nothing there. But the sheets on the furniture rippled, like something small had passed beneath them. The smell of earth grew stronger, mixed with a faint sweetness, like fruit left too long on the branch. She followed the ticking sound through a doorway and into the dining room. The long table was still set, plates covered in a thin crust of dust, glasses filled with a dark residue. At the head of the table sat a man in a faded gray suit. His skin looked almost translucent, his hair white as salt. His eyes were open. "Mr. Harker," she said softly. He smiled, slow, unnatural. "The mountain sends you." His voice was papery, dry, like leaves scraping stone. "I'm with the county," Evelyn said, forcing her tone to stay even. "I'm just checking in. Are you all right, sir?" He blinked once. "We keep the hill quiet. It feeds us its breath." Her throat tightened. "Do you live here alone?" He tilted his head toward the ceiling. Footsteps moved above them, heavy, deliberate, too slow to be human. Dust sifted down with each step. Evelyn's pulse spiked. "I told them to stay resting," he whispered. "But the roots remember voices. They wake when strangers speak too loud." Before she could answer, the lights flickered. A low hum spread through the walls, like the deep drone of a hive. The wood under her boots vibrated softly. "Mr. Harker," she said, "we need to leave. This structure isn't safe. He rose, swaying slightly, and pressed a hand to his chest. It's not the house that's alive, miss. It's the ground beneath it. We were only meant to tend it, but the soil got hungry. The hum deepened. In the window's reflection, Evelyn saw movement, branches writhing just outside, not in wind, but in rhythm. The walls seemed to breathe, faintly swelling in and out. She backed away. I'm calling for help. The old man smiled again, the expression pulling too far. Help won't come up this road anymore. The hollows closed itself. The last thing she heard before running into the mist was his voice, soft and steady. The Harker line keeps the mountain dreaming, but sometimes dreams want to wake. She didn't stop until the forest broke into an open clearing. Behind her, the fog churned as though something vast were moving inside it, pushing upward, pressing against the sky. When she looked down at her hands, they were coated in a fine layer of red dust, not soil, but powdered stone. It pulsed once, faintly warm, and somewhere deep in the hollow, the clock that had been ticking for 50 years began to count backward. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the hollow, the sink of earth, where the Harker house had been, and the shape that moved beneath. The surface like something breathing. The storm had passed, but the wind still whistled through the cracks in her rented cabin, making the walls shudder as if the mountain itself exhaled. By morning she'd convinced herself there had to be an explanation, a geological fault, a sinkhole, something ordinary. She called Sheriff Dalton before the sun rose and begged him to meet her at the ridge. He arrived in his old truck, coffee steaming from a paper cup, eyes red and wary. "You're back already?" he muttered, stepping out. "Most folks who see that place once don't ever come back." "I need to know who lived there," Evelyn said, "who the Harkers really were." Dalton stared at her a long time before answering. "That name's older than the county. You won't find it in any census after 1902. Town record burned down that same year. Some folks say the Harkers lit it themselves." They hiked up the slope together, the air sharp with pine and rot. Where the farmhouse had stood, there was nothing now but a depression in the ground, like a mouth that had closed over what it swallowed. The fence posts still stood in a crooked circle, each one carved with the same sigil, a spiral with 3 points branching from its center. Evelyn knelt, brushing dirt from one of the carvings. "You've seen this before?" Dalton hesitated. "My grandfather called it the mark of keeping. Said it was carved to hold something in, not keep folks out." She looked up. What would they have been keeping in? He didn't answer. His gaze had drifted toward the trees. Where the fog was thickening, though the sun was already high, they found an old cellar. Door half buried in mud at the edge of the clearing. Dalton pried it open with a crowbar, the hinges groaning like an animal's cry. Inside, the air was cold and dry, untouched by weather. Lantern light glinted off shelves lined with jars, hundreds of them filled with dirt. Each jar was labeled with a year, 1891, 1892. Evelyn read aloud. They kept soil. Dalton lifted one jar, squinting at its contents. "Not just soil," he murmured. Inside, beneath the packed clay, something small and white pressed against the glass. A tooth dot. They left the cellar in silence. When they emerged, the sky had dimmed, though it was barely noon. Evelyn's phone had no signal. The wind had died entirely. Back at the truck, Dalton took a long pull from his coffee before saying, "There's someone still alive who might know. An old woman down by Miller's Crossing. Calls herself May. Claims she's kin to the Harkers, though she's never proved it." That afternoon they drove to Miller's Crossing, a town more ghost than Place 3 houses, a shuttered gas station, and a church that leaned as if tired of standing. May's shack sat behind the churchyard, its porch choked with vines. When Dalton knocked, the door creaked open on its own. May sat in a rocking chair by the window, her hair the color of cobwebs. "You found the hollow," she said before they spoke a word. Evelyn swallowed. You know about it. May's eyes were cloudy but fixed straight on her. The mountain remembers everyone it's eaten. Harkers just learned to live inside it. Dalton frowned. Inside it? She nodded slowly. They said the earth there was sacred. Fed them, kept them whole when the fever came. But the land started asking for more than it gave. One by one, the Harkers stopped burying their dead. They planted them. Said the roots would carry their voices to the mountain's heart. Evelyn's stomach tightened. Voices. May leaned forward, her voice dropping to a rasp. The ground talks, if you listen long enough. Whispering, humming, like it's dreaming. The Harkers called it the Deep Mother. Said she chose them to guard her sleep. But they started changing. Their skin turned pale as chalk. Their eyes went black. My great-grandmother fled before the last harvest. Harvest? Dalton echoed. May smiled, showing small yellowed teeth. Every 7 years, they said the earth needed waking. The Harkers would open the soil and feed her what she asked for. Folks went missing. No one went up there after that. Thunder rolled outside, though the sky was still clear. May's chair stopped rocking. If the ground's staring again, she whispered, you best run before it remembers your name. On the drive back, neither of them spoke. The trees along the road leaned inward, their trunks slick with rain that hadn't fallen. When they reached the ridge, Evelyn saw something new. The depression, where the farmhouse had been, was no longer empty. A faint green light pulsed beneath the soil, rhythmic as a heartbeat. Dalton gripped the wheel. We seal it off tomorrow. Get the county up here, fill the hole. But Evelyn wasn't listening. The hum May had described it was there, vibrating through the air, through her bones. And beneath it, faint but certain, she heard her own name whispered from the ground. That night, Evelyn couldn't stop hearing it. The hum rose through the floorboards of her cabin, through the mattress, through her chest until her heartbeat fell into rhythm with it. She pressed her hands to her ears. But the sound wasn't in the air anymore, it was inside her. She stumbled outside into the fog. The forest was black and silver, the air too still for wind. Down the slope, she saw faint lights moving, lanterns, dozens of them, swaying like a procession. She thought of May's words. They guard her sleep. Dalton's truck pulled up moments later, headlights cutting through the mist. He jumped out, shotgun slung over his shoulder. You hear it too. Evelyn nodded. The sound had deepened, a slow, bone-deep vibration. It's coming from the hollow. They hiked up the ridge, the lights below them weaving through the trees. As they drew closer, Evelyn realized they weren't lanterns at all. They were flames burning in glass jars, the same jars they'd seen in the cellar. Each one glowed from within, not orange but green, and the air shimmered around them like heat above asphalt. The ground where the farmhouse had stood was split open, a fissure yawning wide, breathing mist that pulsed with the light. Shapes moved along its edge, pale figures, thin as branches, their eyes reflecting the same eerie glow. Dalton lifted his gun, but Evelyn grabbed his arm. Wait, the figures were chanting, not words, not sounds, but a vibration that matched the hum in the ground. And as Evelyn listened, her vision blurred. The chant wrapped around her mind, pulling her downward into the rhythm. She saw flashes, memories that weren't hers. A man in 1892 kneeling in a field of bare soil, whispering into the earth. A woman standing over a grave that wasn't a grave but a furrow in a crop bed. Children with white eyes standing hand in hand around a tree, listening. When she came back to herself, Dalton was gone. The fissure glowed brighter, and one of the pale figures was standing just inside its light, reaching toward her. Evelyn. It was Dalton's voice, but when she stepped closer, she saw it wasn't him. The thing wore his face, but its skin was dusted with soil, its eyes black as tar. You shouldn't have listened, it said. The sound of its voice layered, like multiple people speaking through one throat. Now she hears you too. The ground trembled. The fissure widened with a sound like splitting bone. Beneath it, something vast shifted, not alive, but aware. Evelyn fell to her knees as the soil rippled like water. Hands broke the surface, hundreds of them, reaching upward, not to grab, but to worship. A shape rose from the pit, a column of earth, human forms embedded within it, faces and limbs fused into the clay. At its center, the spiral symbol burned like fire. The humming became a single note that split the air. Evelyn screamed. The light engulfed everything. When she woke, it was morning. The fissure was gone. The ground was smooth again, the forest quiet. Dalton's truck was still at the ridge, door open, engine cold. His footprints led halfway down the slope and stopped. Evelyn wandered to the center of the clearing. The soil was soft, freshly turned. She knelt and pressed her hand to it. It was warm. A faint whisper rose from beneath her palm. Not words this time, just a sound, like breathing. She pulled her hand back and saw 3 small marks on her skin, spirals, faintly glowing before they faded. She stumbled down the ridge, into town, but no one remembered her name. The sheriff's office was empty, the windows dusty, as if abandoned for years. The roads were overgrown, the power lines sagging under vines. She found a newspaper on a bench half-rotted, dated 12 years earlier, and from somewhere deep beneath the pavement, she heard the hum again. Evelyn turned toward the mountains. The ridge was still there, but its outline had changed broader, like the earth had shifted outward, and at its center, faint in the rising mist, she thought she saw the silhouette of a house, the Harker house. Only this time, it looked new. Asterisk, if you can still hear the hum, don't ignore it. They say once the mountain learns your name, it never forgets. Maybe that's what happened to Evelyn. Or maybe she's still there, part of the soil, whispering for someone else to listen. But if you think the Harker curse ended in those hills, you're wrong. There's another ridge further east, older, quieter, where the ground never freezes, and the trees bleed sap that smells like iron. Locals call it the root line, and what sleeps beneath it is even older than the Harkers ever dreamed. Tell me in the comments, do you think Evelyn escaped, or was she taken back into the mountain? And if you heard that hum in the dark, would you run, or listen? Subscribe before the next story drops, because the Appalachians don't forget, and neither do the things buried inside them.